thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. As you know, we are working on the annual Juried Student Art Exhibition. So the annual Juried Art Exhibition gives students an incredible opportunity to experience and have their work professionally juried and offers recognition along with cash prizes. It's located within Johnson Hall Rotundra, and artists will have their work on display for the campus community and broader. So as you know, just some reminders, the show is coming up, and basically for a reminder that your submissions are due March 7th and 8th at the annual student art exhibition table that will be downstairs. So please make sure that you apply. We also have some entry forms over here in the corner that if you'd like to grab an entry form on your way out, they're also at the front desk where at the front desk here. Okay. So as you know, Jean Grey Mohs is actually the juror for this year's annual art exhibition. So I'd like to introduce Jean Grey, and then we'll get ahead and go on with her artist presentation. So Jean Grey Mohs is a North Carolina-born multimedia working in painting and sculpture. Mohs received her Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in 2002, and later her Master of Arts in Teaching from George Southern University in 2008. Her work has been exhibited both locally and internationally. She has shown in multiple venues, such as the Contemporary Art Museum in Raleigh, the North Carolina Museum of Art, the Green Hill Gallery, and Meredith College. Her work has been broadcasted on Georgia Public Radio and published in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Southern Living and Traditional Home. So please let me welcome Jean Grey Mohs.
I'm honored to be with you guys tonight. Thank you for your time on a 5 o'clock on a Thursday for coming out. I am a narrative abstract artist. I have a studio downtown at Art Space. So if you ever want to come by and connect, I'd love to have you. I'm in Studio 110. Well, with that being said, tomorrow's First Friday, so it would be terrible not to plug it. We have some amazing artists also opening 3 exhibitions at Art Space this Friday, including our beloved Clarence Haywood, which is, you know, a local Raleigh, among a couple other artists. And what I thought today, especially kind of this informal group, is to divide our time a little bit. I want to talk about my work in the beginning, and then I thought coming to students, it might be helpful for me to talk about my professional experience as an artist and tell you kind of like the behind the scenes a little bit. I remember wanting to know so much kind of like transparency into people's practice. So, you know, I don't know how in depth your business is associated with your arts program here, but when I went to school back in 2002, I felt like it could have been a part of the program that could have been bolstered a little bit. So I'm just going to talk about some of my professional practices a little bit. I welcome questions from you guys. I'm going to ask you guys to do a couple things as we move forward with our evening tonight. So please feel free to like engage and be a part of it and have an open mind. And I would appreciate that. So I'm just an open book for you guys here today. Things I've had experience with. I've had over, 100 group exhibitions, 20 solo exhibitions in museums and universities abroad, etc. I've written a grant for a gallery to open down in rural Georgia, a $70,000 grant that was open for 3 years. That was really exciting. So I've had my toes in lots of different places over the years. In fact, I've been exhibiting since 1997. So I have quite a range of experiences and networks and people. So that's just kind of where I'm coming from to give you guys an idea. I also was a teacher for about 12 years in Wake County, off and on. So anyway, all the things. So where I want to kind of root us today in my practice is my pillar of my practice is thinking about artwork as object as vessel and process as catharsis. So for me, artwork is not art therapy, but yes, also art therapy. And this, I don't know if you're familiar with, and also my voice down, with an author. Her name is Sharon Loudon. If you haven't heard of her and you're curious about how artists make a living, she's written 2 really great books that have like 40 different essays from living, working artists. And it shows you how many ways people can make a living as an artist. And I really loved this quote because I think it really touched on some kind of my work, which is the power of creativity does not just lie in an artist's work, but also in how he or she continues to create regardless of the obstacles life places in the way. And I feel like this really kind of centers itself in my work, which we're going to kind of go through a little bit. So I want to take you for a little bit of a walk through some recent years or some recent significant bodies of work so you can feel why I call myself a narrative abstract artist, because my work is really rooted in like the story and the narrative, which could be confused looking at that first piece because you think, well, that's not of a person or of a story. But once you dig deeper, it's kind of all in there. So I recently talked to someone who's potentially writing an article about me, and they love the author, Flannery O'Connor, and was talking about the South, right? And I grew up in Greensboro, it's not far from here, and I've always kind of been jealous of other cultures because of how rich they are, how many traditions they have. And I think I'm just a Southern white woman, like, what do I have? Like, you know, people say hot dog, or they say like baseball, or I don't know. And I think, you know, what can I claim? And this person brought up to me, which resonated with me, is that the South, for many reasons, is a haunted landscape that we are living within. We carry a lot. There's a lot of grief. There's a lot of hardship. There's a lot of past that we're walking with every day, right, and grappling with. And I feel like I can relate to that. It's been a way sort of that I feel like I've been able to, I don't know, it's kind of how I've approached the work in the way that it's kind of carries these big significant moments for me. And so these are some past works for me. And I had a professor, his name was Greg Carter, way back when. And he said to me, like, when you're working, do you start with the idea or do you start with the material? And for me, the idea comes first and material comes second, right? So this is older works, but I wanted to bring it up so you kind of start to understand the thread that comes like through the work, all right? So loss, this is a series of loss, 2 of them, and 1 of birth. And if you would, for just 2 minutes, and I'll time you, turn to your neighbor and talk about like what material specifically you see being used that might help to encapsulate like this theme. All right, I'm not gonna listen. Turn to your neighbor. You got 2 minutes. Well, how does the material speak to the theme? You've got 1 minute left. Final thoughts. All right, last 5 seconds. Okay, thank you for participating with me. Would anybody like to share one thing they see that a material represented and what it might mean to bring out into conversation with me? Anybody be willing and brave? Yes.
Okay, I was thinking of loss with the paper. It's like to make paper you have to kill trees.
Yeah.
And so you end up using that to create another.
Yeah, I like that. Anybody else want to share one before I? Well, I love that connection, and that actually connects to the work I'm using now, right, with the wood. If you think about it's a life kind of served and being reused and renewed. But in this one, yeah, this piece was about the fragility. The material was really fragile. Like I delicately hand stitched, and I tried to show the stitching in the top, each one of these together. I've been a part of an artist group for 20 years, and for 20 years we did this installation in this pine forest, and I have so much to say about that, but that's why you see it out in the forest. But the idea was you walked in this tiny room and to feel that power of grief, how it's kind of slicing at your sides. You can kind of see through it, but it's ever present. And so obviously this was a one day thing. The piece up top with the black, that's made with a black ballpoint pen. And the idea of loss moving through the years as memories kind of deteriorating and fading from your mind or fading from the picture. And then I have twins, I don't know if I mentioned that, they were born in 2014. So this is when they were in the belly, right? And so I was thinking of like, I needed something traditional, something that reminded me of like a household or a home, right? Something that thought of like fertility, birth, growth, things to like center me in like a really positive space. So I made this whole body of work called Fruits of Our Labor, which is, this is just a small sort of picture of those as it happened. Now, as my kids grew, I moved into, again, thinking about material in a way of like, how can it translate the message? Motherhood became like a hyper isolating experience for me. And so I started thinking about the 7 rooms of our house, which we didn't get out of too much, and thinking about if like our house was like a constellation and you were looking down in it, like what movement would be exposed, what like invisible work of the mother would be within these like rooms and these walls. And one of these in particular was named Satis, which is the idea from Greek mythology. Is this character is seen as a great whale, this idea of like, you know, swallowing you whole. It's missing color, you know, on purpose, right? It's missing like the life that I felt, I don't know, I was just worn. And then moving forward, this is also like an art therapy, even talking to you about it, I was diagnosed with a end of life stage lung disease. And so the pictures become about leaving obstacles on the page and dragging the paint through it, and like how that might change a person or how that might change the material, and really letting go of this control, right? So that was around 2018. Now in 2019, I had a life-saving double lung transplant. And so in that moment, the work became anew, right? So I started working with wood. And as you can imagine, the wood is like, I don't know, pretty important to the work. I love the idea that it was something that was living and then is now being renewed or being used in a new way. And in this way, has been a really powerful therapeutic process for me, accepting that someone, you know, the loss of someone else's family related to, you know, this gift of life, but also donate life. And so the work is made of wood. It is supposed to mimic a lot of things, which I'll kind of talk about, but this is a little bit kind of thinking about as a body of work changes. An artist that I really love and admire, his name is Erhard Richter. He's a famous artist that everyone may recognize, but what I love the most about his work is that through his life, you see why he changed, when he changed, right? And kind of the thought, you can see like the artist's mind at work, right? So I want to show here a little bit of like the translation of the work as it's gone on. So I'd like to read you my statement to kind of center ourselves a little bit, but feel free to read along. So through various media and with a current focus on painting and sculpture, her work merges her lived experience as a person with chronic illness and past disability into art. Using maple plywood and wax thread, she hints at the presence of 2 bodies born separately but now bound in a new perfect balance and a reflection of her experience with a double lung transplant. By using sturdy wood and the seemingly fragile wax thread as art-making materials, she explores the emotional, physical, and psychological space in those moments of vulnerability, anxiety, fragility, and resiliency. Her work zooms in on ideas of strength, fragility, and balance, a world those with chronic illness all know too well, which in the end, I think is also like a universal message of things that we're balancing in this life, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be health. So this is a small selection kind of images that I wanted to show here. These pieces are meant to be like totems. They're meant to be sort of objects of hope and objects of joy. I'm gonna talk a little bit about my practice later, but transplant doesn't always have positive outcomes. So these are like meant to be these powerful, joyful, I don't know, lights of hope or without kind of a better word to say that. But they start to kind of become artifacts. And these pieces are made very precisely. They can feel like they've been kind of picked up and reused, but from beginning to end, they've been created. This just gives you a sense of scale of some of them. which are, a little bit bigger. So the elements I want to talk about. When I was a teacher and I taught younger kids, I always talk about, artists hide in their work and maybe don't hide in their work. So many details that are important. It's like clues. Like when we walk up to a work, we're detectives to discover what is the artist leaving for us, the trails that comes behind a little bit. And so I want to talk a little bit about the pieces or the elements within my work that is really important. We spoke a little bit about the wood. The wood is really important for its idea of having once lived and being reused, but it's also a rigid material. It's a heavy material. It's a material that is irregular. It's a material that can kind of take a beating. It's very resilient. You can saw it, you can sand it. It has these worn edges. It has this like feeling to it. And all of those things I feel like translate to exactly what I'm trying to say with the work. They're all bound by wax thread and tiny little wax thread. And each place where there's 2 holes that I've drilled, so there's only 2 lines connecting them. So it's supposed to feel really quite fragile, but in theory, it is actually quite strong. I brought one with me. This is a smaller one, just to give you guys a sense. But the idea is that I love is, I don't know if you guys remember, which I brought with you, like Jacob's ladder of our youth. I want them to feel kind of playful, so they can fold in on each other. But then they also have this thing where if they're not leaning correctly, then they fall apart, which isn't a message in of itself, right? So these are the 2 lines holding them together. It's a wax thread, which can I get wet? If you think about 800 old books, it's still going strong. And then at the end, if I die and someone needs to rethread it with wax thread, that'll be fine. But it's very supported, and it lends itself to the balance, which is kind of what I mentioned before, this health balance that I'm walking. Again, this universal theme of this balance we all walk. The lean is really important to me, this idea of supporting itself. The cracks are really important. I'm working on a body of work now, which I'll talk about in a minute, but I'm excited for what that might provide. As far as the positive and negative space, this is me thinking about, I guess, life and death in that way, right? Like both sides. And I go out and I sketch, which I'll show you in a little while, but I look at like the trees, earth's lungs, and I capture lots of the shapes in between branches. I also look at structures, at foundations, and think about those things as reflected in our internal landscape, like our inner landscape, our ribs, our lungs, and how they all kind of, this is like a minimal version of those organs. So the shapes are really important. And then of course the irregularity, and this can go many ways, but I love the idea that it was living, it's been worn by many hands, but also in our age of AI, this can't be created on a CNC machine, it can't, it can, I guess, but it doesn't have that same sort of like life to it. And I feel like I'm revolting a little bit about everything being machine made. And the color is something I grapple with. I've obviously done realistic work before, and I find the color to be almost the most challenging part of the work. But it's there, and these bright colors is meant to be joy, right? It's meant to like harness those feelings, but I do feel like I'm moving in a direction of stripping away the color. So this is a piece that I'm working on right now in the studio that I'm excited about. I have a show coming up at Duke University Hospital in May, which is quite a large space. And so I'm thinking about directly focusing on the thoracic cavity, which is like the area that holds all of your main organs, and using that space to create sort of scaffolding around that space and then lighting it from the inside. So it, you could say it's 3D, but then like to enter like a spiritual element within. So this is the kind of where I'm moving with the work. Now, as far as process is concerned, the process is super important to me. I collect shapes everywhere I go. I don't know if you guys are artists, carry your sketchbook with you, but I have a sketchbook that I with me. Wherever, it doesn't matter where I am, I'm collecting those shapes. And this serves as a reference point as soon as I sit down with my material. This is just kind of a quick thing to show you a blip into all the different things that go into one piece, but I batch work because there's so many different stages to the work, right? Tools I regularly am using: scroll saw, jigsaw, drill, bandsaw, orbital sanders, needles, wax bookbinding thread. And each step has its own significance to me. In the beginning, I explicitly paint two bodies in one sitting, and then I pull shapes from sketches to bring them together on their own. And so it becomes this idea of two bodies, right, in one. And then there's this idea also of sometimes I'll make the shapes from the pieces and I'll set them aside, and there'll come a day where I have the puzzling, where I try to see who fits together. And I imagine this is my surgeon who, as my family says, found the golden lungs who fit the cavity, right? It's explicitly kind of a large idea, but I'm trying to work through it within my work. Okay, now influences, I feel like some time ago, I sort of sat down and thought about what it is that I love the most about art or artists or, out in the world, and thought about who do I admire and what are traits that I feel like I could identify with, right? So a couple of my most favorites are Shannon Finnegan, which is the top left. And she uses, what I love about her work is this idea of disability, visibility, bringing things into the light that people wouldn't necessarily know or observe. And so using her work as advocacy, that goes the same for an Australian artist, Amy Claire Mills. She also does work about disability, chronic illness, but has this like great humor with it. So these pillows, which you probably can't see, a lot of her work was called unsolicited advice. So it'll be like prayers, or did you go to the doctor, or like these wonderful phrases, which anyway, for someone having experiences, wonderful. Top right, this woman, Andrea Zattel. I love her. She grew up, I guess, moving around in a van a lot. So has ideas of like space that's really specific to like material and minimalism. And I just admire her a lot and feel like I love the idea of stripping something down to the bare essence. And then CJ Hendry, which is an Instagram star. Some of you probably even know who she is, but I love her because she's making it work on her own terms. She's not attached to a gallery. She's not attached to museums or universities. She makes a living as an artist kind of in her own way. She makes hyper-realistic drawings, but really what I'm drawn to her about her work is her marketing skills and her ability to kind of blaze her own path. So it just gives you a little bit of an idea of things that influence my work. Now I wanted to pause here because that's like, it's hard just to sort of talk at you. Is there any questions? Because I want to kind of shift gears now and talk about my experience as a working artist. Are there any questions about my experience, my work, my...
I have a question.
Yes.
And I might have missed it when you were talking about like all of the decisions that you make as you're going.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about color. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how you're choosing color when you're making
Yes.
that work?
Thank you for asking. I'm also ADHD, so I tried to like make all my good notes, say everything I wanted to. Thank you for asking. So when I make two different bodies, often I will let the day, the mood, the environment, the resources available to me be that moment, I guess. If looking back, you may have noticed, I also try to take the hand out of the work. Like if you think of like printmaking as like a indirect mark making, I don't really want people to see my hand in the work. So colors are made by like soaking, staining, scraping, digging. Like there's lots of works that don't involve a brush. Like I don't even really use brushes in my studio anymore. But the color, I think and it may be that in that question is the challenge is sort of there's not my blue period, or you know what I mean? Like I don't tend to think like these are all going to be shades of green, right? I think that sometimes it just comes to me in that moment. And then once the pieces are made, sometimes it will take months for a partner to find itself from what I've created. And sometimes it will be immediate. Like I'll make a piece and I'll remember one and I have sort of a pile of shapes that I can pull from. Yeah. So good question. Does anyone else have a question about the work before I shift my mindset? Okay, great. All right, so working artist. Things that have helped me navigate being a working artist is knowing my concrete pillars are what is important to me, right? Letting my values drive the work. So up here, there's two main ones, which is community. right? Community as being like supporting the people around me, elevating the people around me. I'll talk a little bit about an exhibition I'm organizing at the end, if y'all have seen that, yes or no, I'm not sure. And then representation. Representation is super important to me, and why I awkwardly come up here and talk about all the super vulnerable things that have happened in my life. Before, when I was in the life stage, I needed to know there was someone like me. And so I tried to articulate it as much as I can. I speak to pre-transplant patients at Duke University every 3 months. I also am had this incredible thing happen to me that is still happening right now, but I spoke at the North Carolina Museum of Art, and someone in the audience works for a company who is growing tissues and organs. And we have been in connection today. I was in a planning meeting for some events coming up with this whole regenerative medicine group in Winston-Salem. And so I'm very excited about that. This feels like that's hopes and dreams for lots of people. So those are really important things. And all of that's to say is when you find your core values of what kind of artist you are, what you want to do, life becomes very easy. You know, the spaces that you want to have your work in, you know, the people you need to reach out to, you kind of drill it down and your path becomes very clear. And I wish someone had maybe said that to me a little bit earlier, which is why I'm bringing it to your attention now. I'm also going to be doing a education experience at the Greensboro Project Space in Greensboro called Object as Vessel, Process of Catharsis, where I'm going to bring in an ADA certified person. We're doing 4 different modalities like dance, writing, listening, and making, talking about working with people bringing their own kind of things they need to carry within a work, and creating a safe space for them to be able to do so. So these are things that are integrated into my practice that are really important to me. This piece bottom left, all of this work right now is up in at the Atrium Wake Forest Hospital right now, which in this case, the point is not necessarily it's going to sell off the wall, but it's in the center of the hospital where all the patients are coming through, and to be able to provide like a joyful, bright pop-up color in their days is really important to my work. Something else that's really important is artist as mother. I think throughout history, it's been kind of said that we can't be both. I feel like it's important to kind of bring it up. That's part of who I am. And to be able to do that, I hyper-manage my time. So as far as working, I batch work. Mondays are always for admin days. I have an explicit like gallery sheet that I work on. And these are just behind the scenes stuff. So this is just one example of one thing of you know, however long that document is. At the bottom, we have, you know, galleries, health consulting, universities, museums. Within each of those tabs, I have a whole list of contacts or people I want to reach out to, right? And then ways. So on Mondays, I might be reaching out to 2 new people that I haven't known, or right, talking to someone that I've just connected with. And then with time, kind of those rhythms start to take you, I don't know, start to pick up. Transparency, I always love when people talk about this personally, but this is where I make my money. And I think it's really interesting. So I do this all within like a Google sheet. And as I, you know, income, outcome, or outgoing, incoming, I list it, and then, you know, with materials or this or that, so that I know coming to the next year where I should put most of my energy. So this is this past year's. I just moved into art space in May. And so started working on sort of like gearing up for holiday season in June. And you can see that was, you know, made a lot of sense because it was a big portion of sort of like where my income came from. But I think it's interesting to look at those things as you're a working artist to see where your energy is going, where your resources are going, and if it makes sense and if it's working out for you. And then money, I'm sure y'all talk about money. I hope you do in your classes. But what I like to do is goal set for the year. Let's just say, for example, maybe I want to make $50,000 in a year. I'm going to start there, and then I'm going to think backwards, right? How many paintings is that? How many clients is that? How many commissions is that, right? So if you would, just for a minute, you would turn to your neighbor, and I want you to think, I want you to make $50,000 in a year. I want you to talk about how many clients you need at what price point, right? If you want. I'll give you a minute if you want, 2 minutes.
I work in the values. My values are like, so I made $1,000. But I don't know, anything extra is like one of the, but that's when I get books.
It's hard to talk about money. Don't be afraid to.
More than anything.
A dreamscape. It's awkward, but it gives you, it empowers you if you know your steps. And that's your goal. Like goal setting, like what is your goal? And then think backwards. Right? Yeah. Well, that's when people are ready to and willing, and art makes the best gifts. Right? I gave one. Yeah. Yeah. Hey. All right, 10 seconds. Wrap it up. Man, lively conversation. I love it. Does anybody want to share how they're making their money? No pressure. Yes. 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 Yeah, that's a little bit why I wanted to show the transparency. I don't know if I'm as diverse as most people. Most people be like teaching, it would be a little different, their transparency chart, right? But that's important to realize, like, well, how am I going to fill all of it? Yeah, thank you for sharing. Anybody else want to? Okay. Last of money, and then I'll move on because I know it's uncomfortable to talk about. But there's lots of ways to, and this is just for original paintings. So some people are photographers, some people are printmakers. It's different in all sorts of ways. But as far as pricing goes, I price by square inch, right? And then that number that you kind of multiply it by will change depending on your experience, depending on the skills that you have to back you up, depending on the materials you've had to purchase, the tools you've had to purchase, the skills you have in those tools. Like that number will change, right? But like, let's say square inch by dollar amount. For a painting, 18 by 24, right? Square inch multiplier of 4. If you're a beginner, it might be like $1 or $2. I'm not really sure. Everyone will make their own choices. CJ Hendry, her first painting she ever sold, she put it for $10,000. So everyone's different. But you work through it. 18 by 24 is 432 square inches, right? Do that by 4, $1,728. You'll round that to 1,700. Maybe say you have materials are 100. That'll get you to a price. Now also consider you're working for a gallery. They're going to take 40% of that price, right? Right? Or 50 or 60. Yeah. So you have to sort of like really look at your numbers because it starts to get a little crazy. And another thing to consider is if you're in a gallery, right? Like I've shown recently with Charlotte Russell, which is here in town. If someone comes in my studio, that painting needs to be the same price as the painting that she's selling it. And if she's selling it, I can't sell it without her. Like there's lots of things to consider, which I'm sure y'all have talked about, but I'm just going to say those things out loud. Simple formula for pricing work. That's just a great resource. Gives some other options to look at. Upcoming things that are happening, just to talk about them. Current places you can get my work at the North Carolina Museum of Art, at the Pocket Gallery here in town. Just finished a show with Charlotte Russell, but Waterworks Art Gallery. As far as coming up, I already mentioned the show at Duke that I'm really excited about, and as well as the space in October at the Greensboro Project Space. But then there's other things happening. I've got some things at Curie Art Center, at Lump, Raleigh, Sertoma, coming up kind of throughout. But then I was really excited just to talk to a bunch of women today. So I had to, talk a little bit about this. When I was in college, the Guerrilla Girls, which, who knows who they really are. They came to my college and I was a part of an artist group and I really felt like I was living my best life. And we come in and we're talking to them and they look around, they were like, why are you the only girl in the group? And it's like, oh no, like I'm part of the problem. And so I've made it sort of a mission-ish to make sure to elevate female voices around me, especially if you're looking at statistically, it's just not the most beautiful thing out there considering what we're up against a little bit. These are all quotes kind of within the past couple years. So 87% of the works in major museum collections are by men. Only 13.7% of living artists represented by galleries in Europe and North America are women. Just 11% of all acquisitions and 14% of exhibitions at 26 prominent US museums over the past decade were of work by female artists. This is just to light a fire underneath us all. A recent survey of the permanent collections of 18 prominent US art museums found that represented artists are 87% male and 85% white. And even if you look at our own museum here in town in 2021, the number of works were 11% women, 3% Black, and new acquisitions were 22% women and 28% Black. So obviously we need to be the change. This is my small way of adding to that. In April to June, there will be a juried exhibition happening in the corridors of Art Space. I'm not jurying it. This wonderful woman, Jamila Dallas from Durham is, but I'm organizing it. It is for women and non-binary artists. It closes next Wednesday. Please apply. It's a sliding scale of $5 to $15 just to help cover the jurors' time and the reception. It's up there if you would like to do it. That's all I'll say about that. Any questions about it? Okay. As I already said, Art Space is happening tomorrow night. We have 4 spectacular artists, including the 30 studio artists that will already be in the building. So come and see us. And that's it. That's all I have to say. I feel like I just talked at you, and I appreciate y'all talking to each other and allowing me to do that. I think there's supposed to be questions, but I may have already done that. So is there any lingering thoughts? Yes.
Since you're jurying a show,
Yes.
talk a little bit about what you look for in artwork when jurying.
So I've thought about that. So I know that they want a wide selection of works, right? I'm not going to be all pro painter per se, right? I asked if there was a theme or if I should make a theme, and I don't know how that goes. Obviously, I'm drawn to narrative work that has a meaning or a purpose or advocacy behind it, but I don't want that to sway. I think that as I've submitted to many jury shows over the years, it's become obvious. If you don't get in, it's not that the work isn't good, it's that the work doesn't speak to the theme of what was submitted. So I feel like I'm going to come in and I will see a thread that will be within the work naturally, but that could be wrong. And then I might have to say, okay, I need to focus on this one skill or this one idea or this one. That's kind of what I was thinking about. That there has to be some what's the word? It's not the gestalt, but the feeling of the times within the work that's being created here with students from Meredith. That there's a thread that from an outsider might be able to see a little bit clearly. So that's what I'm excited to kind of see. I don't want to say it doesn't need to be like my work for me to like it. In fact, yeah, it's a long-winded answer saying I do not have a theme that I'm going to be looking for. Good question then. Yeah. Yeah,
So, thank you so much.
thanks for your time. Yeah, feel free to. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time this beautiful Thursday.
That's it, yeah.